Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Janet Davis. I'm a member of the board of the Rye Historical Society, and welcome to our Sunday afternoon happy hour reading with Parsons History of Rye. Today, I'll be reading Chapter 2, The Parish of Rye. For a century after the first settlement of white men within its borders, that of David Thompson's party at Panaway, Rye has no history as a town, because, as such, it did not exist. The settlement at Panaway has always been treated by historians as the first settlement at Portsmouth, as indeed it was, the peninsular, and the remainder of Rye as well, having been a part of Portsmouth until toward the end of the 17th century. But certainly it was no less the first settlement of Rye, for the site of that settlement, the Panaway of Thompson and the little harbor of John Mason, is now Rye and not in Portsmouth. Settlements were made on territory now in this town as early as 1635. It was called Sandy Beach for some years and was connected with Portsmouth until the incorporation of Newcastle on May 30th, 1963, and was thenceforth a part of the last named town until separated by an act passed April 30th, 1726, and in connection with portions of Portsmouth and Hampton, incorporated as a, quote, a parish by the name of Rye, unquote. By this act, Rye was to send a representative to the Assembly, and the selectmen for that year were William Seavey Jr., Samuel Brackett, Joshua Foss, Richard Goss, Joseph Philbrick, John Garland, Richard Jennis, Lieutenant William Locke, and Joseph Locke. The town elected Richard Jennis to the Assembly the same year. It was in 1721 that the first move of the residents of Sandy Beach toward securing a separation of their district from Newcastle was made, a petition to that effect being presented to the provincial authorities that year. The petition and the signers thereof were as follows, quote, to His Excellency Samuel Shute, Esquire, Captain General and Governor-in-Chief, and over His Majesty's Province of New Hampshire, etc., to the Honorable the Council and House of Representatives, now convened in General Assembly in and for said province. The humble petition of sundry the inhabitants living about Sandy Beach, partly in Newcastle, Hampton, and Portsmouth, humbly showeth, that your petitioners, the subscribers hereof, have for these many years past lived under great inconveniences as to their having the free benefit of the gospel, most of us living at great distances from our respective meeting homes, especially those belonging to Newcastle, for that, besides the great distance we live from thence, there is the great inconvenience of a ferry, by the reasons of which, for near half the year, we the masters of families, that are best able, cannot but now and then attend upon the public worship of God, as in duty we are bound. And when we do, it is many times late within night ere we can reach our habitations. And besides this great inconvenience to ourselves, there is a much greater happens to the greatest part of our families, our women and children, who can rarely attend at all, or not above 2 or 3 times in the year, and then but those who are grown to years. For our younger children that should imbibe in the precepts of the gospel with their milk, cannot attend until grown to some years. We, having 4, 5, and some more than 6 miles besides the ferry, and we can now count amongst us above 240 souls, and not 1/3 capable to attend as we are now circumstanced. And we think ourselves capable to maintain a minister of the gospel, and to give a competent living as our neighbors' parishes and precincts do. Therefore, we, your humble petitioners, pray that we may be set off a particular precinct from Mr. William Seavey's and westward by the seaside, as far toward Hampton as the Little Boar's Head or Little River, and back into the country about 3 miles and a half or so, as in your wisdom shall see meet, and that we may be empowered to make and raise all our own taxes and gather them. So prays your humble petitioners. And there's a long list of names that you might recognize. I encourage you to look at page 22 of the History of Rye for this list of petitioners. It's names you will recognize. This petition proved ineffective, and the Sandy Beach people continued to suffer through being a long way from any church, and separated by an arm of the sea from the one at Newcastle. And in 1724, another petition was drawn up and presented as follows. To the Honorable John Wentworth, Esquire, Lieutenant Governor and Commander-in-Chief in and over His Majesty's Province of New Hampshire in New England, and to the Honorable the Council for said province. The humble petition of the inhabitants living in that part of Newcastle called Little Harbor and Sandy Beach, and the inhabitants living at the eastward of the Little River, commonly so called, at the easterly end of Hampton, next Sandy Beach, and sundry others of Portsmouth, living near the said Sandy Beach, humbly showeth, that there being 60 families, or upward within the precincts above named, who having for a long time lived at a great distance from any meeting house where the public worship of God has been carried on, and most of us having great families, which very rare above one or two of a family can go to the house of God for the greatest part of the time by reason of the distance we live from any meeting house, and thereby the greatest part of our families have been deprived of the dispensation of the gospel, and there has been almost a famine of the word and worship of God among us, there being near 400 souls, whereof not above the 6th or 7th part can attend said worship, which is very prejudicial to the glory of God and destructive to our eternal welfare. For the greatest part of us thus to be brought up in ignorance, which is a greater grief to us than we can herein express, and the only cause of addressing your honor and the honorable council herein, and preventing the difficulties and hardships which we have for a long time labored under, and for the advancement of the glory of God and the good of souls. We, the subscribers hereof, humbly pray your honor and the honorable the council that we may be set off a particular district or precinct for the maintaining of a minister with the privileges of carrying on the affairs of a town or parish according to the bounds hereafter expressed, or as your honor in wisdom shall see meet. To begin at Sampson's Point, and run southwest to the road from Seaveys to the bank in Portsmouth, and there on the southerly side of the road by Captain Walker's and Captain Langdon's to the road that goes to Breakfast Hill, exclusive of that part of Captain Walker's and Captain Langdon's land that now lieth in Portsmouth, and on the southerly side of the road from between Captain Langdon's and Sloper's farm to Breakfast Hill, to the road from said Sandy Beach to Greenland, and then on a southwest line until it meets Little River in Hampton bounds, and then on the easterly side Little River to the sea, and then round by the seaside to the place where it began, and all that the land that Elias Tarleton and Jeremiah Jordan and Abraham Libby enjoy may be pulled off to said town or parish herein mentioned, we having been at the charge of building a meeting house by the consent and at the charge of most of the inhabitants within the bounds herein mentioned, hoping your honors will grant so reasonable a request for so good end, and your petitioners shall ever pray, etc. We have again another list of petitioners that you will recognize the names on page 24. This petition, though not so numerously signed as the one of 1721, states the number of persons to be benefited by a separation at, quote, near 400, as against the, quote, above 240 souls, unquote, mentioned in the earlier one, and also mentions that the petitioners and other inhabitants of the district have already built a meeting house. The difference in the number of residents is accounted for by the greater extent of the territory asked by the second petition to be set off. Portsmouth did not take kindly to the proposition for a further contraction of its boundaries, as the following from the town records, signed Joshua Pierce, town clerk, and dated the 21st of April, 1724, shows. Vote and remonstrance of Portsmouth against the petition from Sandy Beach. At a public town meeting held in Portsmouth, the 20th of April, 1724, voted that ye prayer of Sandy Beach, so far as it relates to this town, is highly unreasonable, and yet Colonel Plaisted and Captain Phipps, Esquire, and Mr. William Fellows be a committee, in behalf of said town, to appear before the governor and council upon the hearing of the said petition and remonstrate against the same and implead the petition generally, so that there may be no further curtailing or dividing of this said town, which is already reduced to very narrow limits by Newcastle, Greenland, and Newington, and the committee be empowered to employ an attorney in the premises if there be occasion. The opposition of Portsmouth and Newcastle proved effective, and the request of the petitioners was not granted, but they did not weary in the work, and the next year, 1725, presented the following. Petition from sundry inhabitants of the little harbor, Sandy Beach, and Hampton, 1725. To the Honorable John Wentworth, Esquire, Lieutenant Governor and Commander-in-Chief in and over His Majesty's Province of New Hampshire, to the Honorable Council and Representatives in General Assembly convened at Portsmouth in the said province. The petition of sundry inhabitants of Little Harbor and Sandy Beach in the town of Newcastle, and sundry of the inhabitants of the east end of the town of Hampton, and some of Portsmouth or Greenland, most humbly showeth that the dwelling places of your petitioners with their families, which consists of the number of more than 400 souls, are very far distant from the settled meeting houses in the respective towns to which they belong, and thereby their attendance on the public worship of God on the Lord's days is rendered extremely difficult, and at sometimes impossible in stormy weather, and in the winter season, especially to their women and children, so that they cannot pay to God the honor of public worship on his day, which religion and the laws of the government demand of them. And your petitioners with their wives and children, are brought up in ignorance of his word, which evil cannot be reminded but by the favor of your honors and the honorable assembly in constituting them a separate district or precinct from their respective towns, to which they now belong, and enabling them to carry on the public worship of God amongst themselves. And therefore your petitioners most humbly pray that your honor and this honorable assembly would please set off that part of Newcastle called Sandy Beach and Little Harbor, with such of Hampton, Portsmouth, or Greenland, as to you in your wisdom shall seem proper to be a district or precinct for the carrying on the worship of God, and maintaining a school therein according to law, and your petitioners shall ever pray as in duty bound, etc. And they are signatories there as well. This petition, after being considered in the House, was temporarily disposed of in accordance with a vote recorded as follows. Looks like the 10th day of May, 29th, 1725, in the House of Representatives. The within petition being read, ordered that the towns of Newcastle, Portsmouth, Hampton, and Greenland be notified by the petitioners to appear on the second day of the sitting of the spring sessions next, to show cause, if any they have, why the prayer of the petition may not be granted. Jason Jeffrey, Clerical Assessment. With the hearing on their petition postponed yet another year, the petitioners set about strengthening their case, and to that end drew up and signed the following. With the hearing on their petition postponed to another year, the petitioners set about strengthening their case, and whereas we, the subscribers, did formerly petition to the government of this province to be set off for a precinct or district, which we humbly conceive was denied because it was thought that if the prayer of the petition were granted, the great island could not subsist to maintain a minister there without the assistance of a great part of the subscribers. Now, to take of that objection, and in order that the gospel may be continued both at the island and Sandy Beach, we the subscribers consent that £20 annually during the Reverend Mr. Shirtlift's life, or continuance in the ministry at the island, be allowed as follows. That whereas Little Harbor side with Sandy Beach used to pay near 1/3 of Mr. Shirtlift's salary, and there being 5 persons on the Little Harbor side that do not desire to join with us, the petitioners, Lieutenant Sherburne Tobias Lear, Odiorn James Randall, and the widow Wallace, who used to pay about £6 annually toward that minister's rate, we the subscribers do promise engage to make that sum £20 annually, as aforesaid, provided that we may be cleared from all other parish taxes to the several places where we do now belong, December 14th, 1725, in the province of New Hampshire. We also quit the right to the £12 paid by the Isles of Shoals. Sandy Beach Petition, December 29th, 1725. The movement for a separate parish succeeded in 1726, as the following extracts from the legislative records for that year show. The first extract evidently referring to the disposition made of the question at the previous session, and being merely explanatory of the action taken in 1726. Joseph Locke and others preferred a petition to the board directed to the General Assembly praying for a precinct at Sandy Beach, which was read and set down by Sam Penhallow and George Jaffrey. It was at last resolved that the hearing on said petition be suspended till the 2nd day of the next spring sessions. Joseph Locke and others were admitted to the board to prosecute their petition for a parish at Sandy Beach, and the agents for Portsmouth, Greenland, Hampton, and Newcastle appeared also. And when fully heard upon said petition, the petitioners for a parish at Sandy Beach, having obtained leave to bring in a bill, presented one accordingly, which having had its several readings in each house, the same was passed to be enacted, and was signed and sealed accordingly. The title is, quote, "An Act for Settling and Establishing 2 Parishes in the Town of Newcastle," unquote. In the House of Representatives, at a rehearing of the affairs of Sandy Beach petition, voted that the petitioners be let off from all charges, both of poor and all other town charges relating to the ministry and schools of the town whereto they belong, that said petitioners pay £14 a year to the island of Newcastle toward the support of the ministry there during the continuing of the Reverend Mr. William Shirtleaf in the ministry there, and that the island of Newcastle be allowed and paid £12 per annum out of the exercise toward the salary of Mr. William Shirtleaf during his abode at Newcastle in the ministry there, and that the petitioners are obliged to make good all former arrearages and engagements in the town whereto they belong, and that the petitioners are obliged to maintain an able orthodox minister of the gospel at their own charges, and that the island of Newcastle be at liberty about a grammar school, and that the petitioners be and are hereby empowered to make taxes for maintaining their minister and poor as other towns in the province are. The Sandy Beach petition being in dispute, whether it should pass with the amendments on the vote of the council, and the House, consisting then of 11 members present, 5 were for passing on it with the amendment, and 5 against it, and it rested with the Speaker to determine the vote, who took time to consider thereon until the next morning, and then the House adjourned to Friday, the 15th of April, 1726. In the House of Representatives, a vote passed for Sandy Beach petitioners to be a parish by the name of Rye, etc., sent up. March the 26th, 1726, House of Representatives voted that there be a precept sent to the town of Newcastle to choose a meeting parson to represent the parish of Rye in the fall sessions. Thursday, April 28th, 1726 a.m. in the House of Representatives. The vote for Sandy Beach petitioners, after several amendments, was voted and sent up, and now to be named the Parish of Rye. Mr. Sheriff Gambling made return of his precept to Newcastle for the choice of a representative for the Parish of Rye, there being some defect in his return. It was sent to him to amend it. A messenger from the House to the Board, yet there was a member for the Parish of Rye to be qualified, and Mr. Waldron, Richard Wybird, and Archie Macpherson, Esquires, were sent down to administer the proper oaths to the said member, which being done, the said Richard Jennis was admitted to his place as a member of the General Assembly. The seating of Richard Jennis as a member of the General Assembly from the Parish of Rye marks the first success of the endeavor to secure separation from Newcastle. Yet still the separation was not complete and absolute. For Rye, though its people were empowered to make taxes for the maintaining of their minister and poor as others town in this province are, was not a full-fledged town. The island of Newcastle was left at liberty about a grammar school in the new parish, and the precept to choose a meet person to represent the Parish of Rye in fall sessions was sent not to designated officials of the Parish of Rye, but to the town of Newcastle. Though independent in the management of church affairs and in the care of the poor, Rye was not yet in all respects an independent town. The selectmen, in a petition to the General Assembly in 1729 for the establishing of a boundary line between Hampton and Rye, called it the humble petition of the Parish of Rye in Newcastle, and in deeds and state papers up to the close of the Revolutionary War, though Rye is not always mentioned as in Newcastle, it is always designated as a parish and never as a town, and that it continued to be only a parish for some time after the close of the Revolutionary War is shown by the following from state papers. At a legal meeting of freeholders and other inhabitants of the Parish of Rye, convened at the meeting house in said parish on Monday the 9th day of June, A.D. 1783, voted that the selectmen present within the petition to the General Court, and that a copy of this vote be inserted on the back of the petition. Samuel Jennis for Magistrate, addressed to the President and Council, 1784. We, your humble petitioners, show that whereas Samuel Jennis, Esquire of Rye, in the state aforesaid and the county of Rockingham, has been one of our justices of the peace for about 12 years, and in particular through the difficulties of the late war, and as there is nothing appeared against his conduct in that office, we, your humble petitioners, pray that he may be renewed under the new Constitution, and your petitioners, as in duty bound, will ever pray. Rye, January 20th, 1784. I'm going to stop there. It's now about 5:25. I'd like to wish all of the dads out there happy Father's Day, and we look forward to seeing you again next week when we'll continue the reading of Chapter 2, The Parish of Rye. If you have any questions about this reading or the many activities that are happening now virtually from the Rye Historical Society, please check out our website at ryenhistoricalsociety.org. And there's information there about scheduling visits to the museum that are socially distanced. We look forward to seeing you hopefully this summer around the town. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.